Hey guys, we're in Unit 2, Clauses and Phrases. So here we're going to talk a little bit and build on what we learned last time. We talked about an independent clause last time, and here again has the definition. Independent clause is a clause containing a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. An independent clause can stand alone as a sentence. So we've seen this before. Independent clause by itself, Steve excels in the classroom. Independent clause as part of a sentence, Steve excels in the classroom. But then we add on this dependent clause, because he studies regularly, comma, Steve excels in the classroom. Then we can join two independent clauses together to create a compound sentence. Steve is not a great athlete, comma, but he excels in the classroom. And here I want you to write down in the packet just a few things. You guys have seen this before in your other classes, I'm sure. Let me make sure, there we go. This type of sentence, when it's just an independent clause and that's all it is, it does not have any other clauses with it, is called a simple sentence. Okay? Simple doesn't mean it's wrong or it's small or anything like that. It just means that it has one subject, one verb, one clause. Then we have here where we have the independent clauses, it's part of the sentence, but we have this other dependent clause, and we're going to talk more down here. That is, sorry, I don't know why it's doing that. Try it again. That type of sentence is called a complex sentence. So go ahead and write that down. Complex sentence. Terrible typing. Okay. Then here, and it says right here, is a compound sentence, but I always write it next to it because it helps me remember. So these three sentence types are going to be important, and we're going to talk a little bit more about sentence types as we get further and further in the packet, because when you have different sentence types, you create that rhythm in your writing that you want, and we've talked about that with our syntax target all through the years. You want all of those different sentence types. So one is not better than the other. We just need a variety. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this complex sentence today. The complex sentence has this dependent clause. We have an independent clause, and just like someone who is independent, you can live and stand on your own. But if you live with your parents, you are dependent on them, right? In taxes, they file taxes, and you are a dependent. Dependent means it cannot stand alone. You're dependent on something else. It still has a subject and a verb, but it does not express a complete thought. When you say it, you're like waiting for a little bit more. So it can't stand alone as a sentence. Here we have, as part of a sentence, because he studies regularly, Steve excels in the classroom. We can also switch this around. Steve excels in the classroom because he studies regularly. A couple things I want you to notice here. One, it is okay at this point in your academic career that you start a sentence with because, as long as it's part of a dependent clause. And notice when you start with because, you have a comma here, but when the because is in the middle, the comma disappears. We'll talk more about this. If you want to, I always do this, and I guess I could go up and do this. A simple sentence is IC, independent clause. A complex sentence can be here, dependent clause, comma, independent clause. And then a compound sentence is an independent clause, comma, we'll talk more about this, coordinating conjunction, independent clause. Down here we see we have the dependent clause first, comma, then the complete sentence, independent clause. But here it's switched around. So here we have the independent clause, then the dependent clause, no comma. Okay, so a little bit different. We'll talk more about this. So how do I know something is a dependent clause? Well, we talked about it, how it does not express a complete thought, but there is actually more to it. So if you look at this, we have this lovely awoobis word, and I like to say it awoobis because then you remember it. This is not a made-up word. You can Google it. It's actually a grammatical term. But it is a dependent marker that starts a subordinating conjunction. Don't feel like you have to learn that, but that tells you that it has a dependent clause with it. So these words are after, although, as, when, whenever, while, until, unless, because, before, if, since. So these are the most common. These are not the only, but these are the most common. We'll talk a little bit more about ones that you may use. So if you add any of these words to a sentence, it automatically creates a fragment. So we have a sentence, I studied for the test. Great. If we add although I studied for the test, fragment. That one word creates the fragment. So be really careful with it. If you want to say, although I studied for a test, you can. You just have to add a comma and an independent clause. You must have an independent clause to anchor that sentence, or else it's going to be a fragment. So that's why teachers used to tell you not to start a sentence with because. Then you'd say something, because I studied for the test. Well, that's not a complete sentence. You would say, because I studied for the test, comma, I did very well, period. Okay. So we talked about independent clause, we talked about dependent clause, and now we're going to talk about phrases. So a phrase is a group of words that does not contain its own subject and verb. It cannot stand alone as a sentence. So a phrase alone can be a fragment. We could say something like, hoping that his mother would soon arrive. Now students often get confused on this because they say that hoping is a verb and mother is a subject. But mother isn't really the subject. We talked about this before. Who is hoping? Who is doing the action here? We don't have that subject, and so it's a fragment. You would have to say, Steve was hoping that his mother would soon arrive. Or we could add on an independent clause at the end. Hoping that his mother would soon arrive, comma, Steve paced impatiently. This is a really nice sentence type that we're going to be practicing where you have what we call a phrase opener. Again, it creates that rhythm in your writing, even though it's just a simple sentence. It's a more complex, well, I shouldn't say that, but it's a more sophisticated simple sentence than you've probably used previously. Then we have a phrase alone or fragment. Joe dribbled up court, his sparkling new Nikes squeaking with each cut. Great. Here we have his sparkling new Nikes squeaking with each cut. Whenever you have an ing verb, it can't hold a sentence together. You would have to have a helping verb, or you would have to add this to the first part of the sentence, and that's what they do. Joe dribbled up court, comma, his sparkling new Nikes squeaking with each cut. That's one way to fix it. Or you can use an interrupter. Joe, his sparkling new Nikes squeaking with each cut, comma, dribbled up court. Notice when you use the interrupter, there's commas on either side. We'll talk more about that. So here they're asking us to identify the boldface portion as either an independent clause, a dependent clause, or a phrase. So the bold is here. Until you learn to play defense, I have a subject and a verb, you learn, but I have until. And if I look up here, I know until is one of my awubis words. So when I have an awubis word and a subject and a verb, I know it is a dependent clause. So I put dependent clause. Embarrassed and emotionally drained, Ron locked himself in his room. Yeah, that works because Ron is my subject, locked himself in his room, right? That's my verb, he locked. And here I have a comma, embarrassed and emotionally drained. If that was a period, that would not work. So this, embarrassed and emotionally drained, has a verb but no subject. Because I have no subject, it would just be a phrase. Here I have the students worked on their test. Subject, students, what are they doing? They worked on their test. Yep, subject, verb, complete sentence. So that would be an independent clause, a complete sentence all by itself. Most of the students, even the ones with failing grades, respected the teacher. So even the ones with failing grades, is even one of ours? No. Double check that. The ones with failing grades, I have subjects here, right? The ones, but do I know what they're doing? No, I only have a subject, I have no verb, so this would also be a phrase. Until you learn how to play defense, comma, you will have to sit the bench. You will have to sit. This is one that you're going to see quite often where it's a larger verbal phrase, but that is a complete sentence because I have a subject and a verb. So that's an independent clause, complete subject. Then I have the same sentence, embarrassed, emotionally drained. Ron locked himself in his room. Ron locked himself, subject, verb, complete sentence. Then I have the students worked on their test while the teacher graded papers. I have the word while. That is one of my awubis words. So I'm going to know that one of those awubis words creates a dependent clause. So that would be a dependent clause. And then most of the students, even the ones struggling to pass a class, respected the teacher. This one's a little bit tricky. I have my subject over here, the students. And what did the students do? They respected the teacher. So I do have a subject, I do have a verb, even though it has an interrupter here, but I could pull that out and it would still be a complete sentence. So that would still be an independent clause. Okay, just like last time, you are going to continue on clauses and phrases, filling out what an independent, dependent phrase is, all those AWUBIS words, what it creates, and then identifying those clauses and phrases. Make sure you do look at the directions, circle phrases, underline dependent clauses. If you're not sure what a bracket is, if you look up there, I will show you what a bracket is if I can do it. It's that thing. There you go. So it has those little kind of lines around it, brackets around the independent clauses. And then we can check these over with our answer key. Make sure you're writing your sentence and continue on. Good luck.